Good morning, everyone. My name is Cesare Sposetti, and I'm an Italian Jesuit, and I'm currently finishing my theological studies in Loyola School of Theology of Manila. I've been just recently, a few weeks ago, ordained also as a deacon. Today, it's really my pleasure. I'm happy to accompany you to discover something about what Pope Francis says about politics in his last encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. I will say something in general about this fifth chapter of encyclical entitled A Better Kind of Politics. And I also will focus a little bit on my own context of origin, the Italian context. So let me share my presentation. I decided to entitle this little intervention, this contribution, The Heart of Politics, because this was the question that I asked myself at the beginning. Which is the heart of politics, according to Pope Francis and according to Catholic social teaching? And now we will try to answer this original question. Chapter 5 is divided into 5 subtitles: forms of populism and liberalism, international power, social and political charity, the exercise of political love, fruitfulness over results. But actually, at a close reading of the text of this chapter 5, we realize that the core, the central point of all this intervention is political love. This encyclical has been defined as maybe the most political of Pope Francis's encyclical so far, exactly because the Pope wanted to analyze, to go deeper on this idea of political charity, political love. Pope Francis is not naive. He knows how the world nowadays is. He knows that actually politics in great part of the world is very far from being a form of charity. But exactly for that, together with the tradition of Catholic social teaching, he wants to emphasize and to put our attention into the ideal, where politics should go and what we Christians, citizens and people involved in politics have to direct their attention. So, according to Pope Francis, political activity is a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity, inasmuch as it seeks the common good. So, again, according to the tradition of Catholic social teaching, love, of course, overflows with small gestures of mutual care among different people, individual people. But love is also civic, can be also civic and political, and it makes itself felt in every action that seeks to build a better world. So love is expressed, as Pope Benedict also said in Caritas in Veritate, also in macro relationships, social, economic, and political. Now, I try to list down some characteristics of this political love as they appear in Fratelli Tutti. First of all, political love is a kind of commanded love. Pope Francis takes this from the tradition of Thomas Aquinas, who distinguished between elicited love and commanded love. While elicited love is the love that springs up from the virtue of charity and expresses itself also in the individual personal relationships, the commanded love is the love that expresses itself in a more institutionalized way. And this is exactly the political love. And Pope Francis did a very interesting example about that, saying, if someone helps an elderly person to cross a river, that is a fine act of charity. The politician, on the other hand, builds a bridge, and that too is an act of charity. We have 2 acts of charity, but on 2 different levels. Second, this is also very following the tradition of social teaching of the Church. This charity, which is the spiritual heart of politics, is always a preferential love shown to those in greatest need. So whoever, as a Christian, is involved in politics, and also as citizens, we should care first of all, about the marginalized, excluded, the poorest of the poor. These are the prior subjects of our political action. Third, this follows the tradition of the Church, but Pope Francis gave a particular emphasis on this. The importance to have a spirit of openness to everyone, to the readiness to dialogue with everybody. Dialogue is a word that also is very important in this encyclical. So, as I said, Pope Francis knows very well how divided is our world nowadays. And yet, especially because we live in this world, it's very important for us that a good politician takes the first step and insists that different voices be heard. Using another image that Pope Francis really likes, society is not to be considered as a sphere, as a kind where everything is uniform. Society governed by uniformity. Society is rather a polyhedron, like with many faces, with many different faces, that can harmoniously stay together and give a rich painting. Fourth, this is also to counter what politics usually is nowadays, the importance of patience, of long-term perspectives. Politics is a process. It's a process of dialogue, as we have seen. It requires time and patience. So true statecraft is manifest when in difficult times we uphold high principles and think of a long-term common good. This is the exact opposite of what most, especially of the populist parties, are doing. And finally, as a synthesis, and this is really original by Pope Francis, political love has to be tender, has to be caring. Amid the daily concerns of a political life, the smallest, the weakest, the poorest should touch our hearts. Indeed, they have a right to appeal to our heart and soul. They are our brothers and sisters, and as such, we must love and care for them. So, in order to do politics, we really need a tender heart, a caring heart, especially for the poor, as we have seen. Now, these are the general principles. How can we apply these principles in the current global context, in such a divided global context? Pope Francis is also here following the tradition of a Catholic social teaching in trying to find a third way, a middle way between two ideological extremes. Traditionally, the two ideological extremes were the communist socialist ideology, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the extreme capitalistic ideology. Now, these two poles have a little bit changed. On the one hand, we have populisms, and on the other hand, individualistic liberalism. And what can be the middle way between these two extremes? Side with a real people, with a real notion of a people. Now, what Pope Francis says about populism in this encyclical is very interesting, because it's the first magisterial statement, the real magisterial statement of Pope Francis about this political phenomenon. He already spoke a lot about this phenomenon in many interviews, speeches, etc., interventions. But so far, no magisterial statement. This is the first one. And this statement is actually the fruit of an evolution of Pope Francis' reflection of this issue. Pope Francis comes from a very particular context, a Latin American context, where populism, the term populism, the term people had a very specific meaning. And he had to face the European context, becoming a pope. He has to face also a European Western concept of populism, which was very different. And so he tried to find, to cope with these different terminologies. What Pope Francis says that the term populism can be very deceiving, because the term populism in its very root from Latin populus, has in this very root the term people. And people is a good term, according to Pope Francis, but actually according also to the social teaching of the Church. So what is the problem of populism? The problem of populism is that it disregards the legitimate meaning of the word people. Why? Because the original meaning of the word people, according to Pope Francis, is an open-ended, people is an open-ended concept to To be part of a people is to be part of a shared identity arising from social and cultural bonds. So it's not a closed concept, something just to be opposed to other identities. It's a shared identity. And also, it entails a slow, difficult process of advancing towards a common project. It's not something that is just defined, just fixed, but it's something dynamic. It's a process. So, for that reason, the idea of people, this idea of people is very different from the idea of people that usually populists have. Populist leaders seek popularity by appealing to the basest and most selfish inclinations of certain sectors of population. This is very clear in Europe, from where I come from, where populists usually exploit the fear of immigration, the fear of religious pluralism. And they try to build a concept of people that is closed in itself. But on the other hand, the Pope also criticizes what he calls individualistic liberalism. What do we mean by that? Individualistic liberal approaches view the society as merely the sum of coexisting interests. We can say also they view the society as merely the sum of individuals with no apparently anything in common. And Pope Francis wants to counter also this claim. And he notices also that in certain contexts, those who defend the rights of the most vulnerable members of the society tend to be criticized as populists. And actually, this is the problem also in Europe. The people, many times in this particular time of history, feel that the populist parties are listening to them more than the other parties. But we know, as we have seen, that actually populist leaders are also manipulating the people. So that is what we are. That is the problem that we are facing nowadays. To avoid, on the one hand, the manipulation done by the populists, and on the other hand, to refuse this kind of ideology, where also the marketplace, the market could solve everything. This is also a very common stance in the Catholic social teaching, that the marketplace cannot solve all the problems. We need solidarity. We need, in some cases, also the intervention of the state to regulate the economy. Now, going to my own context, Italian context, which I found very interesting, not only because it's my own context, I know it very well, but because Italy has been defined in Europe as a kind of laboratory of many populists. It's a place where populism started to appear quite early. Now, in Italy, there are nowadays many populist parties, and they have some similarities in their ideologies. We have a nationalist ideology, anti-immigrant and anti-European narrative, anti-pluralistic narrative usually, and distrust in liberal democracy and its institutions. On the other hand, in Italy, we have also some other parties that claim to be heirs either of a socialist communist tradition or of a liberal tradition, and present themselves as anti-populist. But what is the problem? In doing so, they risk also to lose actually the contact with the real people. And this is the problem, no? Populists nowadays they give the impression that they are able to listen more to the concerns of the people. So, what can be the solutions to this situation? Pope Francis proposes several ways. One is to give a particular role to the popular movements. This is particularly true in Latin America. Another is to increase the role of international institutions, and this is also to counter the nationalistic urges that now there are in the world. But I focus especially on the third point, because I think, especially in my own context, it could be the most effective. So foster the role of dialogue and encounter, fostering social friendship and fraternity against the individualistic mindset. Social friendship and fraternity are also two very important terms in this encyclical. And they can be fostered exactly by an attitude of dialogue. But concretely, how can we concretize this dialogue? Especially, I'm thinking of Italian society. Of course, Italian bishops and also Pope Francis talking to the Italian bishops says that the solution in this time of history is not actually to create new Catholic parties, as it was in the past, but not only also to have a kind of high political formation, to form only very Catholic elites. This is very important. We have to continue to do that, but it's not enough. Because nowadays it's really important to go again to the peripheries, to reach out the marginalized of a society. I was quite inspired by what I saw here in the Philippines, what was done especially by Bishop Ambo David of the Diocese of Caloocan. He established in his diocese many different mission stations, exactly to reach out the unchurched, the people that are at the margins, not only of the society, but of the church. And actually, I realized that is what maybe politics also should do in our country, my country. So, it's very important that we find a way to create new spaces for synodality. Synodality is another word that Pope Francis really likes. It means to walk together, synodos, to walk in the same way with the people, involving as much as possible the unchurched Catholics and the non-Christians. How can we do that? First of all, finding something to do together, creating projects to do together, taking care of a particular territory, organizing events together. But these are occasions for encounter. But also learning to listen to one another, to share one another, to be enriched in the dialogue with one another. We can think, in a very poor neighborhood, in Italian periphery, listening to the concern of the people, also about immigration, also their fear about religious pluralism, religious diversity. It's important to listen to their concerns, because only listening to them, we can address them, and maybe we can see the best way, we can learn from them the best way to help and to address these concerns. Finally, at the end of this chapter, Pope Francis again says that politics is something more noble than posturing, marketing, and media spin. And he gives us, in a very Ignatian way, some questions that are good as an exam of conscience at the end of the day, to see how good citizens and good people involved in politics we have been. These questions can be, how much love did I put into my work? What did I do for the progress of my people? What mark did I leave on the life of the society? What real bonds did I create? What positive forces did I unleash? How much social peace did I sow? What good did I achieve in the position that was entrusted to me? These questions can be really useful to see at the end of the day if we are following the right path in our being Christians involved in politics, if we put the love at the heart of our political activity. Thank you very much for your attention. God bless you all.